Don't sign. The waitress didn't raise her voice. She didn't step forward. She simply stood there, tray trembling eyes locked on the pen, hovering inches above the paper. Julian smiled already, tasting victory. The contract was flawless. The Arabic was decoration. No one here could read it, except her. She had already seen the lie, the wrong clause, the fatal word buried where greed never looks. A billionaire was about to lose everything, and the man who thought he owned the room hadn't realized the smallest person in it was the only one who understood the truth. The restaurant was called the Obsidian, and it was the kind of place where the air conditioning smelled like old money and vanilla orchid. It sat on the 45th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, looking down on the city like a judge passing a sentence. Inside, the walls were lined with dark velvet, and the chandeliers were rumored to be reclaimed crystal from a sunken French ocean liner. For Sarah Jenkins, the Obsidian wasn't luxury. It was a minefield. Table 4 needs water. Sarah, move your feet or you're out on the street. The hiss came from Henry, the floor manager. Henry was a short man with a mustache that looked like it had been drawn on with a Sharpie and a temper that shortened the lifespan of everyone around him. "I'm going, Henry," Sarah whispered, grabbing a chilled bottle of Pellegrino. She adjusted her black waistcoat. It was slightly too big, hanging loosely on her frame. She had lost weight recently. Stress tended to do that when you were working double shifts to pay off your late father's crushing medical debts while living in a shoebox apartment in Queens that rattled every time the subway passed. Sarah was 24, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Once those eyes had scanned textbooks on comparative linguistics at Columbia, Clear's Throat University. She had been a scholarship student, a prodigy who could switch between French far and Arabic as easily as breathing. But scholarships didn't cover chemotherapy for a dying parent, and they didn't cover the funeral costs that followed. So Sarah dropped out. The diplomat she wanted to be was gone. The invisible waitress remained. She moved through the dining room with practiced silence. That was the rule at the Obsidian. Be available, but never present. Hear everything, but listen to, Clear's throat, nothing. Tonight, the tension in the VIP section was palpable. The best table, the one by the floor-to-ceiling window facing the Empire State Building, was occupied by Julian Thorpe. Everyone knew Julian, or at least they knew the version of him that appeared in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He was the 30-year-old CEO of Thorpe & Vanguard, a private equity firm that specialized in distressed assets. He was handsome in a predatory way, with slicked-back blonde hair and a suit that cost more than Sarah made in a year. "This is it, Richard," Julian was saying to his associate Richard Sterling. Richard was older, heavier, and sweating profusely despite the cool air. "The whale is swimming right into the net." Sarah approached the table to refill their glasses. She kept her eyes down, but her ears were open. It was a habit she couldn't break. "Are you sure the documents hold up?" Richard whispered, wiping his forehead with a linen napkin. "If his legal team checks the translation." "Relax," Julian scoffed, taking a sip of his scotch. He didn't bring a legal team. He brought security. Typical royalty. They think muscle protects money. It doesn't. Intelligence does. And Mr. Al Maktoum, he's playing tourist. He wants to buy a piece of American history, and I'm going to sell him a fairy tale. Julian tapped his fingers on a thick leather portfolio resting on the table. "Besides," Julian added, his voice dripping with arrogance, "I had the Arabic verification stamped by my guy in Cairo. It looks official. Who's going to check the waiter?" Julian laughed a sharp barking sound. He didn't even look at Sarah as she poured water into his glass. He just waved a hand dismissively near her face, treating her like a buzzing fly. "More ice," he commanded, not breaking his gaze from Richard. "Right away, sir," Sarah said softly. As she walked back to the service station, a cold knot formed in her stomach. She knew the name Al Maktoum. Anyone who read the financial news knew the family name. But this specific man, Sheikh Hamdan, was known for being low profile. He wasn't the type to splash cash on yachts. He invested in infrastructure hospitals and green energy. Why was Julian Thorpe a man known for gutting companies and selling the scraps doing business with a philanthropic billionaire Sarah? Henry snapped his fingers in her face. Table 4 is arriving. The Sheikh. You will serve them and listen to me. Henry grabbed her arm, his grip painful. Mr. Thorpe specifically requested that the dumb blonde not serve him tonight. So I am sending you. Do not embarrass this restaurant. If you drop a fork, if you breathe too loud, you are fired. Do you understand? I understand, Sarah said, pulling her arm away. She took a deep breath. She needed this job. She had rent due in 3 days, and her landlord was already threatening eviction. She just had to keep her head down, pour the wine, and ignore the fact that Julian Thorpe was about to rob a man in broad daylight. But as she watched the elevator doors open, Sarah felt a strange prickle on the back of her neck. Out of the elevator walked a man who didn't look like a billionaire. He was dressed in a modest charcoal grey suit, no tie. He had a neatly trimmed beard and dark, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He walked with a quiet confidence flanked by 2 large men who scanned the room with professional paranoia. This was Sheikh Hamdan. Julian stood up, buttoning his jacket, his predatory smile widening. Your Highness, welcome to the Obsidian. Hamdan smiled politely, shaking Julian's hand. Please, Mr. Thorpe, just Hamdan. I am here as a businessman, not a prince. Of course, of course. Julian ushered him to the seat. Hamdan, please sit. We have the view, the wine, and the deal of the century. Sarah approached the table with the menus. As she placed the leather-bound book in front of Hamdan, he looked up. For a split second, their eyes met. He didn't look through her. He looked at her. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. It was a small gesture, but in Sarah's world, it was rare. Champagne to start, Julian asked loudly. I took the liberty of ordering the 1998 Dom Perignon White Gold Jeroboam. Water is fine for me, Hamdan said softly. And perhaps some tea later. Nonsense. Julian laughed. We are celebrating the acquisition of the Liberty Port Grid. $200 million of infrastructure that will revolutionize the East Coast. And you, my friend, are the sole owner. Sarah froze mid-step as she retreated to the station. Liberty Port Grid. She had read about that project in the Times left behind by a customer yesterday. The project had been stalled for months due to environmental lawsuits. It was a dead duck, a money pit. Why was Julian selling a bankrupt project to the Sheikh? Sarah returned to the station, her hands shaking slightly as she prepared the water service. She looked at the table. Julian was leaning in his charm dialed up to 11. Richard looked like he was about to pass out, and Sheikh Hamdan sat calmly, hands folded, listening. He was the lamb. Julian was the butcher, and Sarah was the only one in the room who could see the knife. The dinner service was an agonizing theater performance. Julian ordered courses that weren't on the menu, demanding the chef prepare specific truffles flown in from Italy. He spoke loudly about his connections at Goldman Sachs and his private meetings with senators, dropping names like breadcrumbs to lure the Sheikh into a sense of security. Sarah moved in and out of their orbit, refilling water clearing plates. She was invisible again. The beauty of this deal, Julian said, slicing into a Wagyu steak, is the exclusivity. The city of New York has granted Thorpe and Vanguard the sole rights to privatize the grid. But we need a partner with vision, a partner with capital, and the government approval, Hamdan asked. His English was perfect, accented slightly, but very clear. My advisors usually handle the due diligence, but since you insisted on this being a handshake deal, to bypass the bureaucratic delays. Exactly. Julian interrupted. Bureaucracy kills innovation. Hamdan, you know this. If we wait for the lawyers to bill us 1,000 hours, the opportunity is gone. The Chinese investors are circling. They want this grid. Julian signaled to Richard. Show him the verification. Richard fumbled with the leather portfolio and pulled out a heavy document. It was bound in blue velvet. He opened it to a page covered in stamps and thick cursive Arabic script mixed with English legalese. This, Julian announced, Tapping the page is the Certificate of Sovereignty and Transfer. We had it translated and certified by the International Chamber of Commerce in Dubai just for your comfort. It confirms that the debt on the project has been cleared and the title is clean. Clears throat. Hamdan put on his glasses. He looked at the document. He traced the lines of Arabic text with his finger. Sarah was standing right behind Julian, holding a silver tray to clear the bread plates. She had a clear view of the document over Julian's shoulder. Her heart stopped. She knew Arabic. She had studied the nuances of the Levantine dialects, the formal modern standard Arabic MSA, and the specific legal terminology used in the Gulf states. She had spent 3 years obsessed with the language, dreaming of working in the UN. She looked at the text Julian was pointing to. It was Arabic script. Yes. It had a gold seal that looked impressive. But as Sarah read the words, her blood turned to ice. The header didn't say Certificate of Sovereignty. It read Standard Liability Waiver for Commercial Waste Disposal. And the body of the text, it wasn't a transfer of a $200 million energy, clears throat grid. It was a copy-pasted block of text from a generic rental agreement for industrial dumpsters, likely pulled from a bad internet translation or a template scam site. It was gibberish. It was a prop. As you can see, Julian said, his voice smooth as silk. It states clearly that Thorpe and Vanguard holds clear title. The Arabic translation below confirms the localized assets. Hamdan nodded slowly. He didn't look angry. He looked confused. Or maybe he was just trusting. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a fountain pen. It seems in order, Hamdan said. 200 million is a significant sum even for my family. But if the title is clean, it's spotless. Julian grinned. His eyes were glittering with greed. He was seconds away from closing the con. Just sign on the bottom line, and we will initiate the wire transfer instructions. Sarah's hands gripped the silver tray so hard her knuckles turned white. Do something, a voice screamed in her head. Stay silent, another voice countered. You need this job. If you speak, you lose everything. Henri will fire you. You'll be homeless. She looked at Julian's smug, oily neck. She looked at Richard, who was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Then she looked at Hamdan. He was holding the pen, the tip hovering millimeters from the paper. He was about to sign away a fortune for a garbage contract. If she spoke, she was fired. If she didn't speak, she was an accomplice. Sarah thought of her father. He had been a man of honor. He had died with nothing in his bank account. But he had never lied to anyone. What would he do? She took a breath. It felt like inhaling broken glass. She stepped forward, reaching for the water glass Julian hadn't touched. More water, sir? She asked. Not now. Julian snapped without looking at her. Go away. She didn't move. She stood directly between Julian and the Sheikh. I'm sorry, sir, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength. But I believe there is a mistake with the menu. Julian's head snapped up. His eyes were filled with fury. Excuse me. We aren't ordering. We are doing business. Get lost. Not the food menu, Sarah said, locking eyes with Julian. Then she turned her gaze to the Sheikh. The document menu. She switched languages. In the quiet, velvet-lined room, her voice rang out clear and authoritative. Not the voice of a waitress, but the voice of a scholar. Say, she said in flawless formal Arabic, Sir, do not sign. The silence that followed was deafening. Julian froze. Richard dropped his napkin. The Sheikh lowered his pen. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes widening in genuine surprise. Ha al-watika moyafa. Sarah continued her Arabic flowing smoothly, using the precise legal tone she had practiced for years. The text does not say what he claims. It is a contract for waste management equipment. It is a forgery. Julian stood up so fast, his chair fell backward with a crash. What did you say? Julian roared, his face turning a violent shade of red. You little rat. What did you say to him? I told him the truth, Sarah said, switching back to English, her voice shaking but defiant. I told him that your government approval is a rental agreement for dumpsters. I told him this is a fake. Julian lunged across the table. You lying. Sit down, Mr. Thorpe. The command didn't come from security. It came from the Sheikh. Hamdan's voice was no longer soft. It was hard as steel. Julian froze. She's lying. Julian stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. She's just a waitress. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's probably high. Look at her. Henry, the manager, came running over his face, pale with panic. Mr. Thorpe, I am so sorry, Sarah. Get out. You are fired. Get security. No one is going anywhere, Hamdan said. He stood up slowly. He picked up the document and handed it to Sarah. Read it. Hamdan commanded Sarah. Translate the second paragraph for the room in English. Sarah took the heavy paper. Her hands were shaking, but she read clearly. Clause 2. The lay agrees to return the sanitation units empty and cleaned of all industrial sludge. Failure to do so results in a forfeit of the deposit. Sarah looked up. It's a garbage contract, literally. The entire restaurant had gone silent. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Every eye was on table 4. Julian looked like he was about to vomit. It's a mistake, a clerical error. My secretary must have printed the wrong file. A clerical error, Hamdan asked, stepping closer to Julian. You asked me for $200 million based on a clerical error. I can fix it, Julian pleaded. Richard, tell him. Richard Sterling was currently trying to shrink into his chair, looking like he wished he could dissolve into the carpet. I think, Hamdan said, turning to his security guards. We should call the police and the FBI. I believe wire fraud across state lines falls under their jurisdiction, does it not? You can't do that, Julian screamed. Do you know who I am? I can buy and sell this whole city. And yet, Hamdan said, calmly gesturing to Sarah, you could not buy her silence. Henry, the manager, was trembling. Your Highness, please. This girl, she is a trouble. I will remove her immediately. If you remove her, Hamdan said, his eyes locking onto Henry. I will buy this building and evict your restaurant by morning. She stays. Hamdan turned to Sarah. The hardness in his eyes melted into warmth. What is your name? He asked. Sarah, she whispered. Sarah Jenkins. Well, Sarah Jenkins. Hamdan smiled. It seems you are the only person in New York City trying to save me money today. But the drama wasn't over. Julian Thorpe wasn't the kind of man who went down without a fight. He saw his life crumbling. The Hamptons' house, the reputation, the ego. He saw the waitress who had done it. His eyes went dead. He grabbed a steak knife from the table. You ruined everything. Julian screamed, lunging not at the Sheikh, but at Sarah. The steak knife gleamed under the crystal chandelier light. A silver streak aimed directly at Sarah's face. Time seemed to warp. Sarah saw the madness in Julian's eyes, the dilated pupils of a man whose carefully constructed reality had just shattered, leaving only raw, violent instinct behind. She tried to step back, but her heel caught on the thick Persian rug. She stumbled, throwing her arms up in a futile attempt to shield herself. You ruined nothing! Julian shrieked, but the blade never reached her. A hand the size of a catcher's mitt clamped onto Julian's wrist, stopping the knife inches from Sarah's throat. It was one of the Sheikh's bodyguards, a towering man named Connor. With a single fluid motion that looked almost bored, Connor twisted Julian's arm. There was a sickening pop of a dislocated shoulder, followed by the clatter of the knife hitting the floor and a high-pitched scream from Julian. Get him off me, assault, assault! Julian wailed as Connor pinned him face first onto the white tablecloth, sending fine china crashing to the floor. The 1998 Dom Pérignon bottle shattered, soaking Julian's expensive suit in sticky golden wine. Chaos erupted. Patrons at other tables screamed and scrambled for the exits. Henry, the manager, was hyperventilating near the kitchen doors, clutching his chest. Sarah stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Hamdan. The Sheikh hadn't moved a muscle during the attack. He stood calmly adjusting his cufflinks, looking down at the squirming, sobbing figure of Julian Thorpe. You have made a grave error, Mr. Thorpe. Hamdan said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the silent room. Attempting to defraud me is a crime. Attempting to harm a woman under my protection, that is a sin. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Within minutes, NYPD officers stormed the restaurant, guns drawn. The next hour was a blur of flashing lights and police tape. Sarah gave her statement to a weary-looking detective named Miller. She described the forgery, the translation, and the attack. She watched as Julian, still shouting about his lawyers and his connections, was handcuffed and shoved into the back of a squad car. Richard Sterling, weeping openly, was led away in a separate vehicle. Finally, the adrenaline crashed. Sarah sat on a velvet chair near the entrance, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She felt small, cold, and incredibly alone. Clear as throat. She looked up to find Henry standing over her. The manager's face was purple with rage. "You," Henry hissed, pointing a shaking finger at her. I'm sorry about the mess, Henry." Zara stammered. "But he was going to... I don't care what he was going to do," Henry snapped. "Do you know what you have done? You brought the police to the Obsidian. You caused a scene. Do you know how much money Mr. Thorpe spends here? Do you know who his friends are?" Sarah blinked, confused. "He was stealing, Henry. He tried to stab me." "And you should have kept your mouth shut and let the men handle business," Henry spat. "We are discreet here, Sarah. We do not have brawls. You are a liability." He ripped the Obsidian logo pin off her waistcoat. "You're fired," Henry said coldly. "Get your things. Get out. And don't expect a reference. If anyone calls me about you, I will tell them you are unstable." "You can't be serious," Sarah whispered. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer injustice of it. "I saved a client. I did the right thing." "In the real world," Sarah Henry sneered, "the right thing is the profitable thing. You just cost us a fortune." Clear's throat. "Go." Sarah stood up. She stripped off the black waistcoat and dropped it on the floor at Ori's feet. She grabbed her purse from the locker room and walked out the back door into the alley. It was raining. A cold, miserable New York drizzle that soaked her instantly. As she walked toward the subway, a black Lincoln Navigator pulled up alongside her. The window rolled down. It was Sheikh Hamdan. "Sarah," he said, "get in. Let me take you home." Sarah stopped. She looked at the warm leather interior, then at her soaked sneakers. She shook her head. "Thank you, Your Highness," she said, her voice hollow. "But I think I've had enough of your world for one night. I just want to take the train." "I insist," Hamdan said. "You lost your job because of me." "Let me compensate you." "No," Sarah said firmly. A spark of pride flared in her chest. "I didn't do it for money. I did it because it was the truth. If I take money now, it makes me look like I was part of the game." Hamdan looked at her with a renewed sense of respect. He nodded slowly. "You are a rare woman, Sarah Jenkins. But be careful. Julian Thorpe is a man who holds grudges, and he has a long reach." Here he handed her a small, heavy business card through the window. It had no company name, just a deeply embossed crest and a phone number. Clear's throat. "If you ever need a lifeline," Hamdan said, "call." The window rolled up and the car drove away, disappearing into the rainy night. Sarah stood alone on the corner clutching the card. She had saved a billionaire. She had stopped a crime, and her reward was unemployment and a subway ride home to an empty apartment she could no longer afford. 3 weeks later, Sarah was sitting on the floor of her apartment surrounded by cardboard boxes. The real-life consequences of that night hadn't been a fairy tale ending. They had been a nightmare. Julian Thorpe had made bail the next morning. His lawyers, a team of sharks from the firm Cromwell and Pike, had spun a narrative so fast it made Scar's head spin. According to the tabloids, Julian hadn't tried to stab her. No, the disturbed waitress had hallucinated the attack. The knife had fallen, and the contract a misunderstanding regarding draft versions. Julian wasn't just free, he was on the offensive. Sarah picked up the letter lying on top of a pizza box. It was a cease and desist order from Julian's legal team. They were suing her for defamation of character. They demanded a public apology and $500,000 in damages. It was a bullying tactic, a slapsuit designed to silence her. But it was working. She had applied to 20 restaurants in the last 3 weeks. Fine dining, casual bistro, even a coffee shop chain. Every interview went the same way. The manager would smile, look at her resume, and then type her name into their computer. Their smile would drop. "Jenkins, weren't you the girl at the Obsidian?" they would ask. The one involved in the Thorpe incident. Henry had made good on his threat. He had blacklisted her on the unspoken do not hire list shared by high-end hospitality managers in the city. The rumor was that she was a troublemaker, a snitch, and mentally unstable. Sarah checked her bank account balance on her phone, £42.50. Her rent was 2 weeks late. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, had slid an eviction notice under her door that morning, 3 days to pay or vacate. She was fluent in 5 languages. She could translate complex legal treaties, and she was about to be homeless because she refused to let a con man steal money. "Stupid," Sarah muttered to herself, burying her face in her hands. "You're so stupid," horted Sarah. "You should have just poured the water." Her phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. "Hello?" she answered wearily. "Is this Sarah Jenkins?" The voice was male smooth and chillingly familiar. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" "You know who this is?" "Sarah, it was Julian." "How did you get this number?" she whispered. "I have resources, darling. That's the difference between us. I have the world. You have a serving tray." Julian laughed softly. "I'm calling to give you a choice. My lawyers are preparing to file the lawsuit tomorrow. It will bankrupt you. You'll never work in this city again. You'll be living in a shelter by Christmas." "What do you want?" Sarah asked, gripping the phone so hard the plastic creaked. "Recant," Julian said. "Go to the police station. Tell Detective Miller you were mistaken about the translation. Tell him you were stressed tired, maybe looking for a payout. Say the contract was legitimate. If you do that, the lawsuit goes away. I might even give you $10,000 for your trouble." "You want me to lie? I want you to fix the mess you made," Julian hissed. "The FBI is sniffing around my accounts because of your little stunt. Make it go away, Sarah, or I promise you, I will make your life a living hell. I will hunt you down until you have nothing left." Sarah looked around her apartment. She looked at the photo of her father on the mantel. He had died of cancer in pain, but he had died with a clear conscience. "Go to hell, Julian," Sarah said. She hung up. Her hands were shaking. She felt like vomiting. She had just poked the bear again. She needed air. Sarah grabbed her coat and walked out of her building, needing to escape the suffocating walls of her apartment. She walked aimlessly through Queens, the noise of the city washing over her. She ended up in a small 24-hour diner near the bridge, nursing a lukewarm coffee. On the television mounted in the corner, a news report was playing. "Julian Thorpe, CEO of Thorpe and Vanguard, seen here leaving the courthouse, claims the allegations are part of a corporate sabotage plot. Meanwhile, sources say the key witness, a former waitress, has a history of erratic behavior." Sarah stared at the screen. They were destroying her. She was one person against a machine of money and lies. She reached into her pocket to pay for the coffee, and her fingers brushed against something thick and textured. The business card. "If you ever need a lifeline." She pulled it out. The gold crest shimmered under the fluorescent diner lights. She had been too proud to take the ride, too proud to take the money. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about survival. And it was about war. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed the number. It rang once. Al Maktoum residence. A clipped British voice answered. "This is Sarah Jenkins," she said, her voice steady. "Tell His Highness. Tell him I'm ready to translate." The response was immediate. "Stay where you are, Miss Jenkins," the voice said. 12 minutes later, the black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the curb of the diner. This time, Hamdan wasn't inside. Instead, it was the bodyguard Connor, the one who had snapped Julian's arm. "Miss Jenkins," Connor said, opening the door. "Please." They drove in silence into Manhattan, but to clear his throat, they didn't go to a hotel or a restaurant. They drove to a private airfield in Teterboro, New Jersey. Sarah's anxiety spiked. Where are we going? The Sheikh is currently in residence at his upstate estate. Connor said it's safer there for him and for you. A sleek Gulfstream jet was waiting. Sarah had never been on a plane this small or this luxurious. Within 30 minutes, they were airborne. 40 minutes later, they landed on a private strip in the Adirondack Mountains. A convoy of SUVs took them up a winding mountain road to a property that looked less like a house and more like a modern fortress of glass and steel cantilever over a rushing waterfall. Inside the house was silent and minimalist. Connor led her to a library that smelled of old paper and cedarwood. Sheikh Hamdan was standing by the fireplace reading a file. He looked different than he had at the restaurant. He was wearing casual clothes, a cashmere sweater and jeans. He looked tired. "Sarah," he said, turning around, "I was hoping you would call." "You knew he would come after me," Sarah said. "It wasn't a question." "Julian Thorpe is a narcissist." Hamdan said, "Men like him cannot abide a witness to their humiliation. I monitored the situation. I know about the lawsuit. I know about the blacklist. I apologize for not intervening sooner, but I needed to see if you would fold." "If I would fold?" Sarah frowned. "Was this a test?" "In a way," Hamdan admitted. "I am surrounded by people who say yes to me, Sarah. People who want my money. People who are afraid of me. That night at the Obsidian, you were the first person in 5 years to tell me no. You risked everything to save a stranger. That makes you valuable. But I needed to know if you were tough." He tossed the file onto the coffee table, and you told him to go to hell. Hamdan smiled grimly. That was the correct answer. "I'm about to be homeless," Hamdan, Sarah said, using his first name without thinking. "I'm getting evicted. My reputation is trash. I'm tough, but I'm also broke." "You are not broke," Hamdan said. "You are just unemployed. I intend to change that." He gestured to the file. "The FBI is building a case against Julian, but it is slow. Thorpe and Vanguard is a shell company. They launder money for much more dangerous people than Julian. The garbage contract you saw. That wasn't just a scam. It was a code." Sarah stepped closer to the table. "A code? My analysts think the Arabic text wasn't just random trash agreements. They think the specific phrasing corresponds to shipping routes used for smuggling. But my analysts are financial guys. They use Google Translate. They lack nuance." Hamdan looked her in the eye. "I need a linguist, Sarah. Someone who understands the dialect, the context, and the culture. Someone who can listen to the wiretaps we've obtained and tell us what they are really saying, not just what the words mean literally. You want me to work for you. I want you to be my head of external relations," Hamdan said. "The salary is $200,000 a year plus housing. You will live here in the guest wing where Julian cannot reach you. Your primary job is to help me bury Julian Thorpe and the syndicate he works for." Sarah stared at him. 200,000. It was enough to pay off her father's debts entirely. It was enough to start over. "Why me?" she asked softly. "You could hire the best spies in the world." "Because you saw the invisible," Hamdan said. "You saw the lie in the glass. And because you are the only one Julian isn't afraid of. He thinks you are just a waitress. He thinks he has crushed you. That is his weakness." Hamdan extended his hand. "Will you help me take him down, Sarah?" Sarah looked at the fire, then at the file on the table. She thought of Henry's sneer. She thought of Julian's laughing voice on the phone. "You'll be living in a shelter by Christmas." The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. She took Hamdan's hand. "When do we start?" "Right now," Hamdan said. He pressed a button on his desk, and a wall panel slid open to reveal a massive screen displaying a complex web of transactions and surveillance photos. This modem, Hamdan pointed to a photo of a man meeting Julian on a park bench. "Is the man Julian calls the architect. We don't know his name, but we have a recording of their conversation in a mix of Russian and Chechen dialect Arabic." My team is stumped. Sarah walked over to the console. She put on the headphones Hamdan offered. She listened. The audio was grainy, filled with wind noise, but through the static, she heard it, the inflection, the specific slang used in the mountain regions of Chechnya. "He's not talking about architecture," Sarah said, her eyes narrowing. "He's talking about the Red Wedding. It's a slang term." "For what?" Hamdan asked. "For a hostile takeover involving arson," Sarah said, taking the headphones off. "They aren't going to buy the Liberty Port grid, Hamdan. They're going to blow it up to collect the insurance, and they're going to do it in 3 days." Hamdan's face went pale. "The grid is near a residential area. Thousands of people live there." "Then we have 3 days to stop them," Sarah said. She turned to Hannon. "But we can't just call the police. If Julian finds out, we know he'll run. We need to catch him in the act. We need to make him confess." How Sarah looked at the screen at Julian's smug face. A plan began to form in her mind. It was dangerous. It was crazy. It required her to step back into the lion's den. "He thinks I'm broken," Sarah said slowly. "He thinks I'm desperate for money. So let's give him what he wants. I'll call him back. I'll tell him I'm ready to recant my testimony. I'll tell him I'll lie for him." "Sarah, no. Hamdan said it's too dangerous. If he gets you alone, he won't be alone." Sarah said, "I'll demand a meeting face-to-face to pay me off. I'll wear a wire. I'll get him to admit the fraud and the arson plot on tape. He will kill you if he suspects anything," Hamdan warned. "He already tried to kill me with a steak knife," Sarah said, a dark smile touching her lips. "I'm not scared of him anymore. I was invisible for years, Hamdan. It's time I showed him exactly who I am." Hamdan studied her for a long moment. He saw the transformation. The scared girl from the alley was gone. In her place was a woman forged in fire. "Okay," Hamdan said, "but you won't go alone. Connor will be your shadow, and I will be listening to every word." Sarah nodded. She pulled out her phone and dialed the blocked number from her call history. It rang 3 times. "Changed your mind already, darling?" Julian's voice answered, dripping with condescension. "You win, Julian." Sarah lied, forcing a wobble into her voice. I can't take the lawsuit. I'll do whatever you want, just please. I need the money today." "Smart girl," Julian purred. "Meet me at the shipyard warehouse 4 midnight. Come alone, and Sarah, wear something nice." The line went dead. Sarah looked at Hamdan. He took the bait. "The shipyard," Hamdan murmured. "That is where the explosives are likely being stored. You are walking into the center of the trap." "No," Sarah said, tying her hair back. Her hair. "I'm the one setting the trap." The New York Naval Shipyard was a graveyard of rusted metal and forgotten industry. At midnight, fog rolled off the East River thick and yellow, under the sparse sodium lights obscuring the jagged silhouettes of cranes that looked like skeletal dinosaurs. Sarah walked down the center of the wet pavement toward Warehouse 4. She wore a simple trench coat, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. In her right pocket, her fingers traced the cold plastic of a specialized transmitter Hamdan's security team had rigged. It wasn't just a recording device. It was a localized broadcast node. "Audio is clear." Hamdan's voice crackled in her tiny invisible earpiece. "We are in position at the perimeter. Tactical units are 30 seconds out. Do not let him move you to a secondary location, Sarah. If he tries to put you in a car, say the code word protocol." "Copy," Sarah whispered. She reached the sliding metal door of Warehouse 4. It was slightly ajar. A single light bulb swung from the ceiling inside, casting long, swaying shadows. She stepped inside. The smell hit her instantly. Chemical solvent diesel and something sharper like ozone. "You're late," a voice echoed. Julian Thorpe sat on a wooden crate in the center of the vast, empty space. He was flanked by 2 men who looked less like bodyguards and more like mercenaries, scarred, silent, and holding automatic rifles. Julian looked different than he had at the restaurant. The veneer of the Wall Street golden boy was cracking. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot. He looked manic. "I had to take the subway," Sarah said, keeping her voice flat. "I don't have a limo anymore, remember?" Julian laughed a dry, humorless sound. "Always the victim. Come closer. Let me see you." Sarah walked forward, stopping 10 feet away. "Did you bring the money?" she asked, straight to business. "I like that." Julian kicked a black duffel bag at his feet. $50,000 cash. Untraceable. It's more than you'd make in 5 years serving pasta. "And what do I have to do?" Sarah asked, eyeing the bag. "Simple." Julian stood up. He walked around her, circling like a shark. "You pick up that phone on the crate. You call Detective Miller. You tell him you were angry at me for a bad tip. You tell him you made up the translation. You tell him the contract was real. And the arson?" Sarah asked quietly. Julian stopped. The silence in the warehouse became heavy. "You're a smart girl, Sarah," Julian whispered near her ear. "Too smart for your own good." "How did you know about that? I hear things." Sarah said, her heart pounding against her ribs. "People talk. You talk." Julian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, it doesn't matter what you know, because tonight the Liberty Port grid problem goes away. And Thorpe and Vanguard collects a massive insurance payout on the tragic accident that destroys the old infrastructure. We build new, we profit, and the city thanks us." He gestured to the back of the warehouse. Sarah followed his gaze. Stacked against the far wall were barrels marked with hazard symbols. Wires ran from the barrels to a central console, a detonator. "That's enough explosives to level 2 city blocks," Sarah said, her breath hitching. "Julian, there are apartments right behind this fence. Families, kids. Collateral damage." Julian shrugged. Progress is messy. He grabbed Sarah's arm, his grip bruising. "But here is the twist, darling. You aren't just here to recant your testimony." He dragged her toward the barrels. "You see, my partners, the ones you heard on the tape, they don't like loose ends, and paying you off is a loose end. So we came up with a better story." Sarah struggled, but Julian was stronger than he looked, fueled by adrenaline and madness. "The story is this," Julian hissed, forcing her hand towards the detonator console. "The disgruntled, unstable waitress she broke in. She wanted revenge on the man who got her fired. She tried to sabotage the project, but oh no, she made a mistake. She blew herself up." Sarah's blood froze. He wasn't going to pay her. He was going to frame her. He was going to kill her and make it look like her fault. "Hamdan." Sarah screamed into the silence. "Now, Hamon." Julian laughed, pulling a pistol from his waistband. "Your dessert prince isn't here to save you, Sarah. He's probably halfway to Dubai by now." "Wrong." A voice boomed from the shadows. The skylights of the warehouse shattered inward with a deafening crash. Repelling lines dropped from the darkness above. Flashbang grenades hit the floor. Bang-bang blinding white light filled the warehouse. The mercenaries fired blindly into the air, but they were cut down instantly by precision rubber bullets from the tactical team descending from the catwalks. Federal agents dropped the weapon. Julian stumbled back, blinded and coughing. He waved his gun wildly. "It's a setup!" he screamed. "Burn it. Burn it all." He lunged for the detonator. Sarah was closest. She didn't think. She didn't run. She threw her body weight against Julian, tackling him just as his hand reached for the switch. They crashed to the concrete floor. The gun skittered away. Julian clawed at her face, screaming in incoherent rage. "Get off me, you filth!" Sarah landed an elbow to his nose, feeling the cartilage crunch. "I'm not filth," she yelled, adrenaline surging. "I am the witness Connor." The Sheikh's massive bodyguard appeared out of the smoke like a juggernaut. He didn't bother with restraint techniques. He simply kicked Julian in the ribs, flipping him over, and planted a boot on his neck. "Stay," Connor growled. The warehouse swarmed with FBI agents. Detective Miller walked in looking grimly satisfied, and behind him walked Sheikh Hamdan. Hamdan walked through the smoke, stepping over the unconscious mercenaries. He stopped in front of Sarah. He reached out a hand and pulled her up from the dirty floor. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face for injuries. "I'm fine," Sarah panted, wiping dust from her coat. "Did we get it?" Hamdan pointed to the black box in Sarah's pocket. Every word Hamdan said. Conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, attempted murder, domestic terrorism. It was all broadcast live to the FBI surveillance van outside. Julian, pinned to the floor, looked up at Hamdan with eyes full of hate. You think you've won? Julian spat blood. The architect will bury you. You don't know who you're dealing with. Thorpe and Vanguard is just one head of the Hydra. Then we will cut them off one by one, Hamdan said, calmly. He leaned down. And as for the architect, we traced the call you made 10 minutes ago to warn him. Hamdan held up a tablet. On the screen was a live drone feed of a penthouse in Midtown Manhattan where SWAT teams were currently kicking down a mahogany door. We have him, Julian. It's over. Julian slumped against the concrete, the fight finally draining out of him. He looked at Sarah one last time. You, he whispered, you were just a waitress. I was never just a waitress, Sarah said, standing tall. I was the person serving you the truth. You just forgot to read the menu. 6 months later, the courtroom was packed. The trial of Julian Thorpe and the dismantling of the architect syndicate had been the story of the year. The media called it the Obsidian Scandal. When the judge read the verdict guilty on all 34 counts, including attempted murder and grand larceny, the room erupted. Julian was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah sat in the back row, watching the baifs lead him away. He looked older, smaller. He didn't look at her. She felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Henry, her old manager from the Obsidian. He looked sheepish, holding a bouquet of flowers. Sarah, Henry stammered, I wanted to apologize. I was wrong. The restaurant, we would love to have you back. Head waitress, double pay. Sarah looked at Henry. She remembered the way he had sneered at her in the rain. She remembered the fear of eviction. Thank you, Henry. Sarah smiled politely. But I already have a job. She walked out of the courthouse and down the marble steps. A black Lincoln Navigator was waiting at the curb. Connor opened the back door. Inside sat Hamdan. He was, clear as throat, reviewing documents on a tablet contracts for a new renewable energy grid in North Africa. How did it feel? Hamdan asked, as Sarah slid into the seat. It felt like closing a book, Sarah said. A heavy one. Good. Hamdan handed her a folder. Because we have a new book to open, the delegation from Japan arrives in an hour. The contracts are in technical Japanese, and I suspect they are trying to hide a clause regarding the thermal output metrics. Sarah opened the folder. She scanned the complex kanji characters. Her mind, sharp and trained, immediately spotted the discrepancy in paragraph 4. They are, Sarah said, pulling a pen from her blazer. They're trying to cap the output at 80% to save on maintenance costs. But if we change this character here, she scribbled a correction in the margin. Hamdan watched her, a look of deep admiration in his eyes. You know, Sarah, he said, I have saved $200 million since I hired you. 300. Sarah corrected him without looking up. You forgot the Brazilian deal last month. Hamdan laughed. Right. 300. He reached into the console and pulled out a small velvet box. I have something for you. Not a bonus, a return of property. Sarah opened the box. Inside was her old Obsidian name tag, but the cheap plastic was gone. This one was made of solid platinum, and engraved under her name were, clear as throat, the words, Sarah Jenkins, Chief of Protocol and Truth. I thought it was a fitting title, Hamdan said softly. Sarah ran her thumb over the cool metal. She looked out the window at the New York skyline passing by. She wasn't the invisible girl in the glass cage anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. She had stared down the devil and won. It's perfect, Sarah said. She pinned it to her lapel right next to her heart. To the airport, Connor asked from the driver's seat. To the future, Sarah answered. The car merged into traffic, disappearing into the city of lights, ready for the next battle, the next translation, and the next truth. Julian Thorpe thought he was invincible because he had money. He thought Sarah was weak because she served him dinner. But he forgot the most important lesson of all. Character is not defined by your bank account. And intelligence isn't defined by your job title. Sarah Jenkins proved that one honest voice is louder than $1 million of lies. If you enjoyed this story of justice betrayal and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were Clear's throat in Sarah's shoes? Would you have taken the bribe or stood your ground? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next.